I would like us to begin by reading from the scriptures from the book of Acts, chapter 17, and we'll pick up the reading from verse 22, even as we continue to reflect on worldview. We are still laying the foundation for that. We'll continue to do so today. So please follow as I read from verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. And as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, and now he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Now, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. Others said, We will hear you again about this. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. Well, yesterday we considered the foundational questions of worldviews. We considered questions such as, what is a worldview? What does a worldview look like? What are the philosophical components of a worldview? In other words, what makes up our properly basic beliefs? How does a worldview form? What is the relationship between science and worldview? How does a worldview function in reality? Can we illustrate the outworking of a worldview from the Bible? Of course, we looked at Matthew 16 right at the beginning of our lecture yesterday. And what is the value of a worldview? I trust that you would all be in a position to answer those questions easily, clearly, for all to understand. Today, we want to reflect on types of worldviews. And Acts chapter 17 verse 22 to 40 that I just read to us, gives us something of a picture of this. And although what we see there are not exactly worldviews, but altars that have been erected to all manner of gods, they reveal something that underneath those practices lie worldviews that move people to conduct in the kind of worship or religion that they did. There were many altars, there were many gods, and they erected an altar even for another, just in case they had left out someone. They erected an altar for them. And Paul sees the opportunity provided that by that unnamed altar, so to say, and told them about God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who created the heavens and the earth, the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. Well, here I want us to be exposed to different types of worldview. We are not yet looking at the Christian worldview, even though we did define it yesterday, because in fact, we'll be looking at these worldviews in the light of the Christian worldview. And there are several worldviews we are going to consider. And we could spend a lot of time doing that. I chose to be selective. I've picked the most prominent of these worldviews: theism, deism, pantheism, animism, naturalism, existentialism, nihilism, and postmodernism. Some of you may be familiar with these. Maybe there are people for whom these would be strange things. The words may be difficult. I assure you that if you apply your mind a little bit, you will understand, because most likely you do see the outworking of these worldviews. You've just never been familiar with their names or what they are called. So as we begin to reflect on these worldviews, I want to begin by looking at the rationale for the arrangement of these worldviews. Now, you will see that I have arranged them in a particular order. Theism comes first. Postmodernism comes last, and we have all those others in between. There is a rationale behind that. When we start with theism, because we want to begin with a theistic foundation, it seems to me that that is what God Himself does. Theism provides a foundational perspective, assuming a personal, transcendent God revealed to man from the beginning. This is how Genesis 1, verse 1, as well as verse 28 and verse 3 of chapter 3. Genesis 1, verse 1 says, in the beginning, God was there in the beginning. In verse 28, God commands the man. He gives him the cultural mandate. In fact, if you go to chapter 2, you will find that he speaks to man further, giving him instructions as to how he expected him to live. And then in chapter 3, we see those conversations after the fall of man. God begins by revealing himself. We begin with a theistic foundation, therefore. We begin with God, the true God of the Bible. We may also refer to him as the Christian God. And then we go on to look at a gradual naturalization from God, from the theistic foundation. We begin to see a gradual naturalization, a step down from theism, a biblical theism, to deism and pantheism and Arian animism. And that naturalization depicted in those three worldviews represents a gradual shift from naturalistic toward naturalistic explanations and a gradual diminishing of the role of a transcendent God. From there, we go on to naturalism. So from theism to gradual naturalism in the form of deism, pantheism, and animism, and then we have naturalism. Naturalism marks a turning point, focusing solely on the natural world and paving the way for existentialism's emphasis on individual freedom. And then we go on to existentialism. It's a downward trend. Existentialism's rejection of objective meaning. We'll go into a bit of detail. Unfortunately, not a lot of it. We won't have time for that. But existentialism now rejects objective meaning, and it is swiftly followed by nihilism, which radicalizes existentialism. So while existentialism emphasizes individual freedom and choice, nihilism takes this emphasis to a radical extreme, challenging the very foundations of meaning, of morality, and of existence. So if existentialism would say, I can make my own meaning of life, I can give my own meaning to life, nihilism takes that further and says, in fact, there is absolutely no meaning. Which brings us to postmodernism. And postmodernism is a critique of the very idea of truth itself. Postmodernism challenges the notion of objective truth. It fragments meaning and it embraces subjective interpretation. And the world we are living in today is really governed by postmodernist thinking or worldview. And you see it applied in so many ways. We complain about the LGBTQ plus. And when you think about it carefully, it is being pushed and driven by postmodernist thinking. Everyone is arguing that we can all make life what we want it. Can all define things the way we want. I don't have to define myself as a man. I can decide to define myself as a woman, and so on and so forth. Postmodernism is at play. Well, these are the worldviews I would like us to look at very quickly. We're going to run. We'll work through each one of them in their turn. And we begin with theism. The word theism was first coined in English in the 17th century to contrast with atheism. Atheism is the belief that there is no God. There are no gods. Theism was also coined to contrast it with agnosticism, the belief that it is not possible to know God, to know whether they exist or not, and if they exist, to know them at all. Theism is the belief in the existence of one or more divinities or deities or gods. And there are different types of theism, of course. First, there is monotheism, which is what we would be comfortable with as defined by the Bible. Monotheism is the belief in one all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good God who is the creator and sustainer of the universe. And there are various examples of monotheism. Of course, Christianity is a monotheistic religion. Judaism is also monotheistic, and Islam would also be monotheistic. They all claim to believe in one God, even if when you look at it carefully, you will find that Judaism and even Islam don't necessarily hold to the idea of the Trinity, the triune God, but they are committed to the idea of the one God. Polytheism is another type of theism, the belief in multiple gods or divine beings, each with their own powers and domains. There are plenty of examples of polytheistic religions, including the religions of the Greek world and the Roman world. Their mythologies are an expression of their commitment to polytheism. I don't know whether that polytheism exists in those two nations, no longer what they used to be, of course, but they were polytheistic in outlook. Hinduism is polytheistic in outlook, and you may even find expressions of that in African traditional religion. We'll come to that. Pantheism is another type of theism, the belief that God is identical with the universe, that the universe is God. And again, there are many examples of pantheism. Hinduism is the most popular, and certain expressions of Buddhism would also be aligned to that. I want to narrow down to what is known as classical theism. I think I forgot to work on this slide just to enlarge the font. I hope you can see it. I'll read it to us. Classical theism is a philosophical and theological framework that describes the nature of God as being one. So God is numerically one. And as far as we are concerned, He is three persons in one. One omnipotent, that is to say, all-powerful God, omniscient, all-knowing, omnipresent, present everywhere. Classical theism believes in that. The Jews would believe in that. The Muslims would believe in that, even though their understanding of God as Trinity is obviously faulty. They also believe that God is unchangeable, is immutable, and He is eternal. He is lifted above the limitations of time. He exists outside of time. He has no beginning, he has no end. He exists in one eternal present. Now, monotheism, as seen in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, of course, holds to all of these things that we have already defined. The distinction between them does include the idea of the Trinity, which we hold to as Christians. And we mustn't downplay that distinction. It's an important distinction. There is only one God. There is only one divine essence. And there are three persons who share in that essence. In other words, the divine essence is indivisible and it is fully expressed in the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Only this God is revealed in the Bible. For that reason, Christianity is a very different religion from Judaism and from Islam. Polytheism can be seen as a downgrade from monotheism because it posits the existence of multiple gods or divine beings, each with their own powers and domains. Now, God didn't reveal a multiplicity of his essence. He only revealed the one divine essence. Monotheism is what God revealed. To think and speak about a polytheism is to entertain a downgrade, a very serious downgrade. Indeed, it is to embrace idolatry. It is to embrace idolatry. There's only one God, any other are false. And to worship any other is to engage in idolatry. And that, in essence, is what the Greeks were doing in Acts chapter 17. Paul introduces them to the one and true God, and is also indicating to them that if there was only one and true God, and it is the God he was preaching to them, to worship anything else was to engage in idolatry. Pantheism can be seen as a further degradation of monotheism because it identifies God with the universe. The universe there is the idol. It rejects the idea of a personal transcendent God and identifies God with the universe, with the created. God is uncreated. Pantheism identifies him with the created. To see God in those terms is to see him in idolatrous terms. This brings us to deism. Deism is a philosophical and theological perspective that emerged in the 17th and 18th centuries, particularly in Europe. And it is the view that God exists, but that he's not directly involved in the world. Deism pictures God as the great clockmaker who created the clock, wound it, and then let it go, let it unwind itself, as it were. So a deist believes that there is God, he exists, created the world, but that he is not involved in the world at all. He is the absent God in a manner similar to the way fathers on the African continent are absent. I know this is also true in other parts of the world. Fathers are absent. They bring children into being, and they are not there to father them. They're not there to bring them up. But the God deism gives us is similar to that. He creates, he fathers creation, as it were, and then he disappears. He's not there, he's not involved, and he is not interested. The key tenets of deism: a transcendent God as the first God, the first cause rather, created the universe, and then he left it to run on its own. God is thus not immanent. He is not present in what he created. He's not personal, not fully personal, not sovereign over the affairs of men. Is not providential. He doesn't create and then begin to operate in what he has created to bring them to their designed ends. He is not that kind of God. The cosmos this God created is determined because it is created as a uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system. So the system God created has causes, it has effects. There cannot be an intervention from the outside. So in this viewpoint, no miracles are possible. Man, though personal himself, is part of the clockwork of the universe. How man lives ultimately is what God determined. It's part of that clock which is unwinding according to God's own prescription. The cosmos, this world, is seen to be in its normal state. It's not fallen, it's not abnormal. There is no sin. Man can know the universe. There is nothing to stop him from knowing what he decides to know. And he can determine what God is like, not by revelation from God, but by simply studying the cosmos. Deists reject the idea of divine revelation. They reject revelation from the Bible or indeed from other sacred texts. Ethics is limited to general revelation because the universe is normal, it's not sinful. The universe has all the knowledge we have. We just need to study it and we will know what is right. History is linear. It is continuous. It moves from cause to effect continuously. And that is the thinking of the deists. Now, it's easy to understand how deism could be considered a logical position. There are some things in the world that seem to point to God as being inactive in the affairs of the world. For example, people ask, why does God allow bad things to happen? Why does God allow the innocent to suffer? Why does God allow evil come into the world? Why does he allow evil men to live? An inactive God would seem to answer these dilemmas. In other words, a deist would simply say, no, that's not God. He did create, but he is not involved. So we can't blame him. That is really the logic of the deist. But when we look at the Bible's response to that, the Bible does not present God as inactive or uncaring. The Bible presents God as sovereign. Although we can't understand God completely, but he is sovereign. He rules over the universe. He is free to do as he pleases. And he has power to do all that he pleases, and no man can challenge that. Daniel makes that clear in chapter 4. The Bible does not present God as uncaring, but as caring. You remember when the children of Israel in Exodus 3 were in slavery, they cried out to God, and God heard, and God came down, as it were, and delivered them from the shackles of slavery. And then we know, and this is the Bible's message, the ultimate act of God interfering in this world, as it were, took the form of his own son coming in human flesh. He became a man, the Bible says, and he dwelt among us. He obeyed on behalf of sinful men. He died for sinful men. He offered himself as a propitiation for sin. So he would bring men to God. He would remove the enmity that stood between God and man, the anger that hung upon man by nature. That is caring. That is God coming into the world to help his people. Pantheism is the next. The word pantheism, derived from the Greek pan, meaning all or everything, theos, meaning God. Pantheism identifies God with the universe itself. So it eliminates the distinction between creator and creation. So pantheism, theologically speaking, is the view that everything is part of an all-encompassing immanent God. All forms of reality may then be considered either modes of that being or identical with it. So ultimately, what pantheists are saying from a metaphysical standpoint is that man is one with ultimate reality. Man is one with God. Is God. Man is part of what God created. And pantheism doesn't make a distinction between the two. So man is one with ultimate reality. Man is spiritual, eternal. I would even go on to say impersonal. Man's belief that he is an individual is an illusion as far as they are concerned. Rather, we are one with God. Our unity with all reality is emphasized. Individual personality is underplayed. Epistemologically speaking, pantheism would claim that truth is an experience of unity with the oneness of the universe. So if you want to really know, you need to be united with the universe because God is united with the universe. So if you would know, you must share in that unity. Truth is something, therefore, beyond all rational description. And ethically speaking, for pantheism, there is no real difference between good and evil. What does the Bible say about all that? Well, Genesis 1 verse 1 makes a clear distinction between the creator and the created. How does that verse start? In the beginning, God. This God created the heavens and the earth. There is God and there is what he created. There is a clear distinction between the two. They are not mingled. They are not one. They are different from each other. Now, some people use Psalm 139, verse 7 to 8 to argue pantheistically that God and what is created are one because God is present everywhere. Psalm 139, 7-8 declares, "Where shall I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there." So God, they would argue, is there, he's everywhere. But omnipresence, yes, it does stress the fact that he is present everywhere. He's not absent from any space. Yet that does not mean that God has mingled himself with what he has created, and that there is a product that is a mixture of God and creation there. He is present, but he remains distinct from what he has created. Let me hurry on to the next, which is animism. Animism is a worldview that posits that all things, including animals, plants, and natural elements, possess a spiritual essence or consciousness. Animists believe that these spiritual essences are interconnected and that humans can interact with them through rituals, ceremonies, and other practices. We can also say animism is the belief that behind every natural phenomena lies a spirit. So you can have spirits in animals, in plants, in mountains, in rivers. Those things are not just nature. They are animated by spirits. It is one reason Africans are not always keen to bring down trees or to interfere with nature. There are different types of animism, and we won't have time to unpack all of this. I have included these in your notes. Now, you may not find this in the notes you received the other day. I'm updating the notes, and by Thursday, I should be able to make the updated notes available to you. Totemic animism is one type of animism characterized by the belief that certain animals or natural elements are sacred and embody the spiritual essence of a particular group or clan. Is what is known as shamanic animism. It's a type of animism characterized by the belief in the existence of shamans who are spiritual practitioners. They are like middlemen. They stand between men and the spirit world, so to say. And if you wish to communicate with that spirit world, you can't just do it directly. You have to go through these shamans. And then there is ancestral animism. It's the type of animism characterized by the belief that the spirits of ancestors continue to play an active role in the lives of their descendants. This is very common in African thinking. Tomorrow, we'll talk about this. The lecture will all be about African traditional religion. But this aspect of animism reflects itself in African traditional religion, as indeed it does in other forms of animism. This has an impact on people's worldviews, of course. It is the worldview of many peoples around the world. You will find animism in South America, a lot of it, in Asia, of course, in the Chinese-related countries, in Japan, Indian cultures, and you will find it in Australia, among the Aboriginals, and you will certainly find it in Africa. It's one of the most common worldviews of the world, even though it does not appear so, because the Western worldview is so dominant. It's been so well popularized that sometimes it appears like that is the biggest and most influential. Animism has a greater hold on the world, I think. It has a profound impact on the worldview of the people who practice it. There are many animistic peoples who believe in being in harmony with the natural environment and recognizing the spiritual essence that inhabits all things. And so you will find in various places people offering sacrifices to a tree. An onlooker from a different worldview would think they are worshipping a tree. But in reality, they are seeing something beyond the tree. They are seeing a spirit in that tree and through that tree. What should be the Christian response to that? Well, Christians believe that God created the world and all living things. That is made very clear in Genesis 1. And it establishes a clear distinction between the creator and creation. We made that point. The Bible warns against idolatry, which includes worshipping or attributing divine qualities to created things. And animism is fond of doing that, attributing divine qualities to created things, to trees, to lightning, to thunder, to animals, to crocodiles, to snakes, to frogs, and that is idolatrous. Also, the Bible does indeed recognize the existence of spirits. Angels are spirits, demons are spirits. But the Bible rejects this idea of spirits inhabiting natural objects or animals. Now, it doesn't mean evil spirits don't do things like that. The serpent was inhabited by the devil. Pigs were said to have been inhabited by demons. But it's demons who are recognized as spirits in the Bible who are doing that. They aren't other spirits, and we are going to look at that tomorrow in some detail. In African traditional religion, for example, they recognize divinities who are different from God. They recognize benevolent and malevolent spirits, angels and demons, but they also recognize ancestral spirits, the spirits of men who have died but continue to live, to be part of the community. That idea is completely foreign in terms of the Bible. Then we come to naturalism. In philosophy, naturalism is the idea or belief that only natural as opposed to supernatural or spiritual laws and forces operate in the world. Naturalism focuses on the natural world. It excludes the supernatural or the spiritual world or explanations. So naturalism holds that everything can be explained by means of natural causes. Naturalism can be summed up with what Carl Sagan's famous quote said, and I quote, "The cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be." Cosmos is all that is. There's nothing beyond the cosmos. The cosmos is all there ever was. There was never anything else. The cosmos is all there will ever be. That's naturalism. No God, no spirits, only what is materially present exists. So in naturalism, matter exists eternally and is all there is. God doesn't exist. The cosmos is not composed of two things, matter and mind, or matter and spirit. So what Paul claims in Colossians, that there is visible and invisible, doesn't exist in the naturalist mind. The cosmos ultimately is one thing, matter, without any relation to a being beyond. There is no God. There is no creator. Nature, obviously, in these terms, was not brought about by creation. They have come up with evolution as a way of explaining how things came into being, which is really no explanation at all. The cosmos exists as a uniformity of cause and effect in a closed system. So this system that came about through an evolutionary process as causes and effects doesn't need an outsider like God to cause anything. Naturalists see the universe as a continuity of space, of time, of matter, held together, as it were, from within, not from without. What do they think of man? Man is just a machine, a personality put together by chemicals and physical properties. We don't fully understand how he's been put together or how he puts himself together. But ultimately, he is just part of this matter. Everything in nature is matter. Man is part of nature. Man is matter. That's all. Even your thoughts are physical things, part of physical nature. The laws that apply to matter applies to man as well. It does not transcend the universe in any way. It is not distinct from other objects in the universe in any way. It is not distinct from animals. It is not distinct from plants. It is part and parcel of this natural entity. Knowledge is a result of physical processes in the brain. Pierre-Jean Georges Cabanis, I hope I pronounced that correctly, he wrote, "The brain secretes thought, just as the liver secretes bile." The point is that man is simply a part of the universe. Death is extinction of personality and individuality. So if men are made up of matter and nothing else, when that matter goes, when that matter which goes to make up a man is disorganized at death, then the man disappears. History is a linear stream of events linked by cause and effect, and it has no purpose. Men just live, they just go on, and when they drop and die, that's it. They are not meant to serve any purpose. Ethics is related only to man. One observation naturalists make is that all men have a sense of moral values. How this sense comes about is through physical things, through intuition. It can come from authority within this natural entity. It can come from conventions drawn up by men within this natural entity. Morality doesn't come from God, it comes from his environment. And so man has a sense of that. There are various expressions of naturalism. We've spoken about atheism, a lack of belief in any God, agnosticism, God cannot be known, and existentialism. We're going to talk about that in a moment. A philosophical attitude associated with men like Heidegger, Jaspers, the Soren Kierkegaard, or like that. And existentialism claims that there is no intelligent being who planned life, gave it meaning, that we human beings choose to give meaning to life. So you may have heard of the saying, life is what you make it. That is an existentialist outlook to life. Well, what is the Christian response to naturalism? Well, matter or the cosmos is not all there is. There is a God. Actually, before the cosmos came to be, before what we know as nature came to be, there was God. Genesis 1, verse 1. This God created the cosmos. This God sustains the cosmos. This God gave meaning to the cosmos. This God is the source of morality. That is made very clear. And this is the point Paul was making in Acts chapter 17, wasn't it? And then coming to the idea of existentialism, it's a word I've already mentioned. It's a much used word. Most often you will hear it in various phrases. You've heard of an existential threat. We see that especially in the realm of politics, where the nation of Israel claims that the Arab nations are intent on exterminating them as a nation. So as far as the Israelites are concerned, Arabs are an existential threat. We hear about existential questions concerned with questions about how and whether life has meaning, why we exist. Those are existential questions. We also hear about existential crisis. Suggests that a person is going through a state of intense questioning and self-doubt. They don't know why they exist. And many people who think like that end up taking their lives because they often are not able to answer those questions. So existentialism posits that humans must create their own meaning and purpose in life. God did not create this world and give it meaning. That is absent in their mind. So basically, existentialists are saying they exist in a world that has no meaning. They just find that they exist. And as they think about their existence, they find that it has no meaning. And very often, that can trigger an existential crisis. I'm going to put these in your notes. I've called it the genesis and evolution of existentialism. When someone goes through an existential crisis, what do they experience? They have something that triggers the crisis, maybe a loss or some trauma or some spiritual awakening. And then they go through an awakening. They begin to become aware of the uncertainty, the ambiguity that they find life to be. And then they go through the dark night of the soul. They experience a literal disintegration of their life. They feel like they have no values, no beliefs, no sense of identity. They just find that they are crumbling before themselves. And then they begin to confront that abyss, so to say, in stage 4. And the result of that confrontation is that there emerges new possibilities before them. And they begin to have a glimmer of hope that they can begin to experience something of meaning. And then they begin to rebuild, to build some meaning, some purpose for themselves. And eventually they discover, they arrive at that meaning and they embrace that meaning. And this is so personal and so subjective that if anyone were to ask them, so what exactly did you experience? They really can't tell you. Something you experience. You may not be able to explain it, but you've made this leap of faith, as it were, this leap of discovery. You have found yourself, you've found your meaning. And a typical conversation between existentialists could be something like this. Have you found it? And the other would say, yes, I have found it. Have you? Yes. It was the most exhilarating experience. I now feel free. I now understand life. I have a purpose. I have meaning. And they can't exactly tell you what that is. Soren Kierkegaard, he was an existentialist, but a religious one for that. Friedrich Nietzsche represented the more atheistic type. And Soren Kierkegaard he seemed to have arrived at this view of existentialism as a result of being unhappy with the church. And so he was trying to find a religious experience that would bring life and meaning to the church. And so he developed his form of existentialism. Well, the Christian response to that, we live for God because God created us. And to the extent that we live for Him, to that extent, we have meaning, we have happiness, we find fulfillment. God created the world and He created man and He put him in this world for a purpose. Once again, Paul reminds the Greeks in Acts chapter 17 that God created them for a purpose, to find God and to find their fulfillment and meaning in God. To live without God is to choose misery. It is to choose this so-called existential crisis. But to have God is to understand that you are here not so much for yourself, but for God, to honor Him, to glorify Him in everything we do, whether we live or whether we eat or drink. We are made to live to the glory of God. And to understand that is to understand the meaning of life. Nihilism is the next non-Christian belief It's the belief that in the end, nothing prevails in a world that is totally meaningless. Nihilism teaches that God does not exist, or to use the language of Friedrich Nietzsche, that God is dead. Nihilism says there is no higher purpose in life, that life is simply futile. So nihilism is a radical form of existentialism. If the existentialist can find meaning, or the nihilist says, actually, there is no meaning. Life doesn't mean anything. Many who have held to nihilistic perspectives end up taking their lives. In other words, life takes them to the logical conclusion. If life doesn't mean anything for them, they don't feel that they live for anything, they come to the conclusion life is not worth living, and so they take it away. They kill themselves. There are different expressions of nihilism: political nihilism, ethical nihilism, existential nihilism. And the Bible has a lot to say about that. Beyond the perceived nothingness, there is one who is greater than unbelief, one who touched humanity, one who assures us that our lives are meaningful, they are not meaningless. There is Christ, there is God. And before this God, we will all appear to give an account of deeds done in the body, to give an account of how we have lived out that meaningfulness. Nihilists choose to remain ignorant, and they suffer the consequences for it. Finally, postmodernism. Philosophical movement that was largely a reaction against the philosophical assumptions and values of the modern period of Western history. So the modern period was a period from the time of the scientific revolution of the 16th and 17th centuries to the mid-20th century. And the modern period was all about discovering the truth, knowing the truth, certainty, defining things. No wonder science developed out of that situation. Postmodernism challenges the very notion of objective truth, the very notion of absolute truth, and instead proposes diversity and suggests that truth is what communities make. Truth is what communities decide, and what is true for one community may not be true for another community. Truth is relative as far as they are concerned. Reality must be constructed through our language and through our cultural paradigms. So what we decide as a culture to be truth, that is what truth will be. What we are able to define in our own languages, that is what truth will be. So reality is something socially constructed. Truths are mental constructs. They are meaningful to individuals within a particular cultural paradigm. They may not apply to other paradigms. So truth is relative to one's culture. There is no absolute truth. Not even God can tell us what is true. There was a time when universities were all about discovering the truth. They did science to discover the truth. Or now they do science to discover diversity. And a scientist who stands up and claims that they have found the truth is a disgrace. The more diverse you are, the more relevant you become in this present time. Values are part of our social paradigms as well. Tolerance, freedom of expression, inclusion, and the refusal to claim to have the answers are the only universal values. Isn't this the struggle in America at present between the liberals and the conservatives? The liberals look upon conservatives as being outdated. They are misfits. They are living in the past because they can't understand diversity. They have no ability to be tolerant. And conservatives, on the other hand, are saying, and I'm thinking here of Christian ones, that there is a God who created the world, who put man in the world and gave him the ability to do culture according to his own law and ways. And there is therefore objective truth that is independent of man and of cultures that everyone must align themselves to. Postmodernism is becoming really the enemy of God and of his word and of his ways. So as Christians, we are saying we can have objective truth, objective knowledge. We can be absolutely, we may not be able to be absolutely certain all the time, but that doesn't mean we don't know the truth. We shall know the truth, and the truth will set us free. John 14, verse 6 refers to Christ as being the truth, the way and the truth. And in Christ, we can know as we ought to know. There are degrees of knowledge. A child may not be able to know everything about anything. They know in their own childish way, but they are still able to know the truth, even if it's not all the truth. Adults can know the truth, even if it's not all the truth. We can all know truth because there is such a thing as objective truth. God knows all truth. God knows all things. And the extent to which we know God, to that extent, he will reveal himself and enable us to know something of himself and of the truth. So these then are the worldviews I just wanted to briefly expose us to. And what we've seen is that the way the worldviews have been arranged highlights the gradual shift from theistic to naturalistic perspectives, followed by the radicalization of existentialism and the critique of truth by postmodernism. What is the answer to all this? Well, the answer lies in going back to theism, to Christian theism, to biblical theism, to the sacred scriptures, to the Lord Jesus Christ in particular. And when we pick up the study on Christian worldview itself, that is what we'll be endeavoring to do, to go back to God and to the Lamb. Amen.